This is NEAF Talks.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the hardest working MC in the cosmos, Vincent Coulihan.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Again, for our NEAF Talks, we actually have a very extraordinary opportunity to share with you today. Our next speaker was hired as one of the Sow sisters for the Space Shuttle program. That white material we saw on the external of the shuttle and internal to the payload bay was not metal or composite material. However, it was a thermal insulation blanket. These blankets were sewn, handcrafted with high precision to protect the astronauts. 18 of these women workers did an extraordinary job in protecting our astronauts, capturing the grandeur of space flight and the intimacy of the needle and thread. Our next speaker's talk, the untold story of Jean Wright and NASA's Seamstresses. Please give a warm welcome to NEAF, Jean Wright.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. First of all, I want to thank the NEAF team for having me. I was back here in 2019, and I've had a lot of people come up to me who remember me from 5 years ago for here. So coming back, I thank you. I have a couple of close friends. My friend Michael and Kathy are in the audience who came all the way to see me, which is nice. Anyway, I want to say right off the bat, it truly was an honor. I was the very last seamstress that was hired for the Space Shuttle program. That in alone is just an amazing feat to me. I think like most of you who are into space, from literally the time we walked on the moon, I was almost 14, probably before a lot of you were even born. But it was a wish that I'd always wanted to be there. I walked outside that night, looked up at the moon, and thought, I don't know how, but someday I'm going to be there. So it took a long time for me. I had my kids, and I was 49 years old when my wish finally came true. And we're known by a lot of names. We were called the Sow Sisters, named by the gentleman downstairs in our building that would make our tile. So they would come up and watch us upstairs doing all the hand sewing, and they said it looked like a quilting bee. So they started calling us the Sow Sisters, and that was a name that stuck. We've been called spaceship dressmakers, ladies in the back shop, because that's what they call our building. It's the Thermal Systems, TPSF, Thermal Protection Systems Facility. And so with that, I will start. This is my book, and I have a book signing scheduled afterward called Sow Sister. It happened by a way of a woman named Elise Maddock, who met me at the Atlantis exhibit and said, this is a story that needs to be told. You're like a hidden figure. And she said, I don't believe most people know just the amount of hand sewing that goes into a vehicle that goes into space. And I dare say it's kind of disappointing when people say to me, you sewed for NASA? Yes. Oh, you built the spacesuits. And I'll say, no, I've met the ladies there, but no, I actually built flight hardware, the actual system parts on the space shuttle. And we have over 2.5 million parts on the shuttle. And us ladies did not quite that many, but quite a number. And the majority of them, we did some machine sewing, but a lot of the parts that we sewed were by hand. Literally a thousands and thousands year old tradition that are still used for something technical that we need. And with all the shuttle parts and with everything that we launch into space, it's amazing to me that that traditional hobby would be used for building technical spacecraft that we send into space right now. Here we go. All right, slide, please. Okay, where I'm here, right here, is I'm standing in front of the Space Shuttle Atlantis exhibit. If any of you have ever had a chance to go to Kennedy Space Center, that was the shuttle we were lucky enough to get. And I'm a docent there, and I speak about what I did on the space shuttle. And so that's Atlantis right behind me. Next. And again, talking about the book, we're having a book signing here afterward, so we can skip on through that. It is an award-winning book. We've been fortunate, we've found out within the first month after the book came out, it's won the 2 awards that are listed, and I'm tickled pink that happened. And especially since Elise is such a beautiful artist on the book. It's her first book, and I'm happy for her too. So next, please. So here's where it begins. People ask me all the time, what did our building look like? Well, the building that you see there on the bottom is my building. Okay, the picture on the left here, that's a part of our team. That's including logistics, the people that do our paperwork, the tile builders, and also the heat cleaners who build who clean our parts. And the ladies that you see in the upper right-hand corner, those are all my space hipsters, we are space hipsters. But these are all my sew sisters. I'm there in the middle, and this is just some of my team. Unfortunately, thank goodness they're not in this picture, but since the program has ended, I've lost 3 of my sew sisters, so that's always sad. So next, please. Okay, I'm hoping you can see the detail in the picture here. These are the blankets that we built on the shuttle right here, all on the upper surfaces. One of the questions I mainly get asked is, oh, surely when you have the blankets on the shuttle, that the tiles are either underneath it or on top. Not true. When we lost Challenger, she was the first orbiter that we put test blankets on her to see how feasible it was to have the blankets on, and of course it passed with flying colors. So unfortunately, when we lost Challenger, we took Columbia, which was our oldest shuttle, and put her in Bay 2, stripped off about 7,000 of her tile, and replaced them with the blankets that we ladies made. They're called fib, or flexible insulation blankets. They come in various lengths, heights, from a placemat thickness to 2 inches in thickness, depending on where they're going to be installed. Next, I'll go into more detail. Okay, this is the Wright 1903 flyer. I bring that up because a lot of the techniques that we used on Shuttle were the same ones that the Wright brothers used, and I know that's pretty surprising. The sewing machine that you see there down at the bottom, that sewing machine was the machine that the Wright brothers used in North Carolina. They found that the wings on their plane needed to be adjusted. The pine that they needed for struts were not long enough in North Carolina, so Wilbur actually had to shorten the wings. So Addie Tate, who was the first postmistress in North Carolina, actually let her use her 1899 sewing machine that she paid $1.50 for. So that's the sewing machine Wilbur used to shorten the wings when they got to North Carolina. I was lucky enough that the Park Service actually let me, if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see me with white gloves on, and they actually let me go into the room where the sewing machine was, and I got to take my pictures with her, and that brought tears to my eyes, because you realize how much history is in that sewing machine. Next. Now, the woman that you see in the upper left-hand corner, she's a heroine of most of our ladies, because we realized she was like America's first female aerospace worker. The Wrights had put an advertisement for her, and she answered the ad. And so she was the one that we first considered the Lady of Flight. She, as you can see the credentials at the bottom, she had a lot that she did for anything to do with flying. But what I find touching is in November of 1969 at 88, she took her first plane ride. And when she was up in the air, they asked her what she thought about all that. And she said, it looks like a bunch of wool clouds. It looks like yarn floating in the sky. Next, please. Project Apollo. Hazel Fellows, who's in the bottom corner. One reason why I love this picture is it actually shows up close. We have a NASA tradition that began with the ladies who worked on the Apollo spacesuits. A lot of people aren't aware. We have this, some think it's odd, but I think it's endearing. We name all of our sewing machines, and that tradition was started with the Apollo seamstresses. Hazel's using either Big Mo or Sweet Sue. We know it's one of those 2 machines. They both were Singer machines that were adapted to be able to sew the spacesuits. Next, please. So some might question why I have this. we sewed down to 100,000ths of an inch. Our specs that we had, our tolerances were very tight on shuttle parts. So I used this as an example. I was at ILC Dover, and one of my friends who worked there, he was a manager there, and I said, everybody's really interested. We're getting ready at the time for the 50th anniversary of the anniversary of landing on the moon. And so I said, you wouldn't by chance have Neil Armstrong's measurements for his spacesuit. I said, I find that interesting as a tailor and a seamstress, and maybe some other people would be too. You see, if you look closely, I mean, even like finger length and ankle length and inseams, there's a lot of measurements that are required, more than I think anybody would think. And I've been fortunate enough, since I'm NASA badged, I'm able to go into the sewing room at ILC Dover, and they name all their sewing machines too. I saw their nameplates on their machines. I think the toughest part for me was the gloves. They only had 1/8 of an inch tolerance to sew in between the fingers. So everything had to be pre-basted by hand before they could sew. That, as a seamstress, is amazing to me to be able to do that. Next, please. And that red-haired woman who looks like Lucille Ball is actually Ruthie Ratledge. The last time I was at ILC Dover, Ruthie was there, and she's the last surviving seamstress who worked on the Apollo suits. And it was really an honor to be able to meet her, and she was gracious enough to let me take my picture with her. Next. So the woman that you see in the corner, that's Aileen Baker. Her son, Herb, works at Johnson Space Center, and he was telling me all about his mother, and I made a promise to him. I said, your mother's story impresses me so much. For those who aren't familiar, when we had Skylab flights, during launch, one of the heat protective pads blew off, and the inside of Skylab got to be over 130 degrees. The astronauts couldn't live in that workstation that way, so some engineers got together, and long story short, Aileen was the one who showed the protective cover that, in essence, saved the whole Skylab program. So I made a promise to Herb, even though his mother has long passed on, I will always, when I do a presentation, I will honor your mother because she had such a significant role in space history. Next. And getting back to Ruthie, these pictures right here are the airbags that ILC Dover made for some of our Mars rovers. And if you look closely, Ruthie's she's right here. Let me just turn around. Ruthie's that one right there. You can still see the red hair. They did a lot of work there. They even did, they've been working since World War II on doing war equipment and everything else in ILC Dover. They have quite a history. It's not only spacesuits, they do a number of things. Next. Okay, this right here, going back to the moon landing, that happens to be a piece of propeller from the 1903 Wright Flyer with Neil Armstrong's signature signifying that that fabric and that wood made it to the moon. Next. Because that is me cutting the fabric. Probably about 2018, Mark Armstrong called my home. I had met him and his brother a few years prior at a space event, and they asked me, we have a special project for you to sew, so you'll get a call the next day. Anyway, long story short, they were getting their Wright fabric that their father took to the moon, and they wanted me to cut it for auction to celebrate the 50th anniversary. So I'm walking in the room, and you see this piece of historical fabric on the table. There's cameras, there's video equipment, because everything has to be certified that you know it's truly fabric that went to the moon. And just the fact when I saw it, I'm thinking, gosh, I get to touch history. And as thrilling as it was working on Space Shuttle, that has to come pretty high up there that I was actually able to see and touch the fabric. Next. So you can see me cutting away, and you also see how horrid the condition of the fabric was. After the Wright brothers flew the plane, they took the fabric off it, put it in a shed behind their house in Dayton, Ohio. It was exposed to a lot of things. They had a great flood in Dayton. It turned the fabric really soft. There's mold, there was coal dust. You can see it's pretty rough condition. And in the bottom corner, you can actually see as I'm cutting the pieces, they were putting them in these little plastic holders that at the top says that it's going to the Apollo, the Armstrong family auction that they're doing the following year. Next, please. Okay, now here's where we go to the shuttle stuff. For some of you that aren't familiar, because I know our launch pads don't look that way anymore, we consider them clean pads. and that they're basically designed now that they can launch any vehicle that needs to be launched. So this is what the shuttle pad, this is pad A, we had pad A and B. This is what shuttle pad A looked like during the height of the shuttle days. Doesn't look anything like that now. The only thing that we've kept is this portion, and even not all of that's there, and it's been painted black. SpaceX now uses that launch pad now. So I have the picture here on this side because I literally worked from up here all the way down to there when I worked on the space shuttle. Next. So that's that fancy little suit that I have on. Whenever we worked inside the shuttle, we had to wear this special protective suit. I could wear it, honestly, we couldn't put makeup on. We had to tape our jewelry and our glasses. But one tradition that we had a carpet of tape, and we always called it the happy dance, because we knew when we were getting ready to go on the shuttle, we would jump on that tape rug and just dance our little feet off so we could clean the dust and dirt off our feet. But it was mainly because, at least for me, I was so excited to be able to work inside of her. Next. Again, there's our building, and one of the questions I get asked all the time, what does it look upstairs? Tiles are built on this end. You can't see in the picture, we have our venting there. All the tiles are built in this section right here. But where you go upstairs, that's where we ladies would sew at the Thermal Protection Systems facility. And that's just a picture there of some of our sewing machines that we have. Quite a lot. You name it, we probably had that sewing machine. Next. Oh, love this. So this is beginning of showing some of the hand sewing that we did. The shuttle had 44 thrusters on them, and that's what gives the shuttle the direction. So what I have here, these are thrusters, and every single one of them are done by hand. The tooling that you see in the back, the wood, that's how we would wrap our fabric around them to build that. That's probably about a 4-day project to make one, and you're thinking, well, they're not that big, but the process to do it. I take a spring tube, which is a flexible tube, and I will wrap it here. Then I take my fabric and drop it down into the center. It has 2 rows of hand stitching that goes around the top part here. Then I put RTV there, and then from there, that's when it gets tricky. Once we do that, we have to put it in a reverse mold and let it dry. Once it dries after 4 days, we unpeel it and we trim the bottom of it. If it's too thick, it gets scrapped. If it's too thin, it gets scrapped. If we squeeze it too hard and some of the RTV, like you can see here, goes above the stitch line, we're allowed 10%. If we go over that, the part gets scrapped. Our average failure rate for our shuttle parts was less than 5%, but if we were doing thrusters, close to 12%, because there's a lot of hand feel, making sure you've got the right tension when you're doing that. Next, please. And that's them in action. That's just some of them. The nose of the shuttle is right here, and that's just an example of some of the thrusters that we had. And then you begin to see some of the fabric that we have outside the shuttle. Again, we ended up taking over 7,000 white tile off and replacing them with blankets. Next. So here's just an example again upstairs. All the things that you see on the table are all the flight hardware that we built by hand. Next. Oh, love this one. If any of you guys are familiar with the shuttle, we had the orange tank, but there's 3 attachment points on the belly of the shuttle. Where the very top one, where it would attach, is exactly where this blanket goes. It's the only fabric blanket that we have on the shuttle itself, and where it attaches at the top, the attachment point goes right in the center of that circle. This blanket's done completely by hand, and it takes almost 5 days to do. It's about this big, and you would think 5 days? Well, that's because it's all done by hand. The thing that's amazing about the blanket is its job is done in 8.5 minutes. That's how long it takes for the shuttle to get into space. But this blanket is so very critical. Where it attaches at, we use explosive bolts that used to kick off the external tank. Well, the bolts are supposed to go this way and ricochet away. Well, back in 2009, we actually had a bolt that went straight up. And if it wasn't for that blanket, we probably would have lost another shuttle. Its job also is, as we use the explosive bolts, it prevents the tiles around there from cracking. Because before we had that blanket, that's exactly what was happening. But that's a neat blanket to build. Next, please. And where you see this is exactly where it gets installed. See how it's the same shape? So the nose is there. This is the nose landing gear door, which is right about in there. And these are the thermal barriers. And so she's a quality inspector, but that's exactly where the blanket would go. Next, please. And that's yours truly a long time ago. Inside those same nose landing gear doors, and actually all the wheel wells, these thermal barriers that we sew, they're 4 feet long. They have 2 spring tubes that are a flexible tube that runs down the center of them. They take us about 4 days a piece to build, and I'm stitching them in. It's a very tedious process because the thread that we use is something that I joke you will never get the thread at Joann's. 3M makes our threads for us. This thread is called AB440. The AB stands for alumina borosilica, which for those of you who aren't into space or know things like that, that's the same glaze that we would paint our space shuttle tile with. So it gives you an idea that it's a pretty high temperature thread. And in our world, if we had fabric or thread dyed pink, we knew they were high temperature. This particular thread melts at 3,250 degrees. And you would think higher temperature, the stronger the thread, but if anything, it's the opposite. I could only stitch an inch before the thread would get so thin that I would have to stop, knot it, bury my knot, and continue on, which is why I'm only able to sew an inch, stop, and you've got 4 feet, and you're doing 12 of those. How we test how tight-fitting they are, our quality will take a piece of plastic that's not even, I would say 1/84th of an inch thick, really, really thin. They'll stick it between the doors, they'll shut all the doors, and if there's any movement, we have to tighten up the thermal barriers again. What they're looking for is when those doors are shut and we have that little piece of plastic that there's no movement at all. Because people think, the reason why we're so strict up front, people think it's the shuttle's tiles that get the hottest area. Absolutely not. The hottest area on reentry is her chin panel, right underneath her nose, the second being in her what we call the wing glove, where the wings indent. That's the second hottest, and I'll explain that further next. So this is me in Udvar-Hazy. I'll be there again on the 4th on Family Day speaking. That was me down in the bottom corner because I was so excited seeing Discovery because I hadn't seen her in a number of years. But in the upper right-hand corner, you see me. They let me climb over the partition that they have around her to let them, I could touch my stitches. I was the last one to sew Discovery's thermal barriers in her before she went up to the Smithsonian. So I always joke with my kids, Grandma has stitches in the Smithsonian, and how many grandmas can say that? Next. Now, this is the leading edge of the wing. The gray material that you see is called reinforced carbon-carbon, made in a company in Texas. For those of you who are familiar, when we lost Columbia, it was in this area that we lost her. As a seamstress, which is fascinating to me, reinforced carbon-carbon actually is a fabric. Even though it's hard as a rock, it starts off as graphite rayon that we burn down to an ash. We layer it with a phenolic resin like you're doing fiberglass, and it's really, really hard. What's amazing to me is being some of the, hottest fabric on board, this fabric is rated to a minimum of 3,200 degrees. Shuttle tile will only do 2,300. So if you look at a picture of the shuttle, you'll see the nose and you'll see the leading edge with the 22 panels are all done with our reinforced carbon-carbon. So again, you can see how thin it is. It's amazing how strong this fabric is. The leading edge of the wing, the fabric is only this thin. It's really, really thin. And what I like to do when I'm at Atlantis, I have a T-seal, which is a separator piece between the 22 panels, and I take it like a hammer and I pound the fabric on the floor, and it sounds like a hammer. Anyway, next. Okay, this is what's unique. This huge temperature differences that I mentioned, and I'm going to turn my back. We go from 3,000 degrees to 2,200 degrees to 1,200 degrees to 750 degrees. It's amazing. This is reinforced carbon-carbon. That's our tile. That's some of our blankets, which are only rated up to 1,200 degrees. And then we go to frizzy, which is a special Nomex felt that's only this high, and it's white, and it protects to 750 degrees. It's amazing what fabrics can do. And if we have any young people in the audience, material sciences is truly the most fascinating. The stuff we do with fabric right now is just amazing. What I have here It's an odd name for a part. It's called a horse collar. Again, depending what 22 panel it's going to go on. They're all done by hand, and they're a minimum of 4.5 feet to 5 feet long, completely done by hand. And then we wrap them around our access panel that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. And then when we get ready to install, you see all that hundreds of thread. We take thread and we stitch it there, and we actually pull, using that thread, pull the blanket down to where it's going to go. And these horse collars go directly right underneath all those black tile. Again, another part all built by hand. Next. Another picture upstairs. These are some of our films. We have polyamide, we have mylar, we have a lot of film that we use. Some of the blankets that you see here, this is in the front, the forward reaction control system. We ladies made over 5,500 silver polyamide blankets. It sounds like a lot, which is true. Half of them have batting in them, and half of them have like 18 layers to them, so they would only be this thick. So we make matching blankets and stack them onto each other. Now, for anybody out here who's a seamstress, I always found fascinating. There's 444,000 holes per yard in the fabric. And the reason why is the blankets will get puffy in space, but as we're re-entering, the blankets will collapse with gravity, and there has to be a way for the air to escape. It's the only film that we have right now that protects against radiation, and we can date. I have down in my booth, I have a gold blanket, which NASA designates as historical blankets, because for the first 4 years of the shuttle program, believe it or not, we use 24-karat gold blend in our film. It does the same anti-corrosiveness, protects the astronauts from radiation, but when the cost of gold went sky high, we had to change to polyamide, and so that's what we build our blankets with now. Next. This is a cool shot. When I told you that the nose was the hottest area, or the chin panel right underneath the nose, what you're looking at right now is it's like you're sitting in the nose looking out. So that's actually inside the shuttle's nose. And what you see down at the bottom, some of those are puzzle blankets. When we did the nose, we made a giant blanket that lined the inside. It was in a quadrant, 4 pieces, which was about this thick. And then we would fill the 19 inches of cavity from the tip of the nose to the bulkhead with all these little blankets that you see at the bottom. Again, all done by hand with our high temperature thread. And they're called puzzle blankets because they fit together like puzzle pieces to fill the inside of the nose. And the chin panel, it's hard to see, but the chin panel is that curve right there. That's the absolute hottest area on reentry. Next. Oh, I love talking about this one. This is Lurch. He's our oldest Singer machine that we had upstairs. And again, keeping with the tradition of naming all of our sewing machines, Lurch is our sewing machine that does 2 jobs for us. He not only quilts the blankets that called Dome-Hecha blankets that go around our engines, but after we finish the quilted blankets outside the shuttle, we call it top stitching in regular world, but NASA calls it closeout stitching. So Lurch will be 2 rows of closeout stitching around each of the blankets before we put them on. So this is what Lurch used to look like before we got it at Kennedy. Next, this is what Lurch looks like now. You can see this is the original area machine. That's the original area. There's the sticker that shows what he used to look like. But we added this section right in here. That's my wheel. That's how I lift my needle up. But that's the machine, again, that we use to quilt the blankets that go around the engines. Next. And here they are. Those white rings that you see around the engines are called dome heat shield blankets. There's actually 4. Two of them that are 4.5 feet across, 2 little ones that are splice pillow blankets. They are for some heat protection, but maybe it's sound suppression. As you can imagine, it's very loud back there. Next. So this is a close-up, the splice pillow blanket that actually joins the blankets to 2 big ones together. We hand sew sleeving to finish off the blanket. We have to hand fold all of these little loops together, and those are all hand sewn. Lurch will do a final closeout stitch because we hand sew the edging on by hand, and then Lurch will do a 1/4 inch top stitch to lock all that stitching in. And then when we get done with the blanket, I imagine most of you will be pretty amazed. We used to hand sew all the shuttle blankets to her back end. We had a special wire thread called Inconel 625, And we ladies would sit on a special round table with the blankets and hand sew them on. But you'd be surprised at how many people would ask me, "Hey, Jean, how hard is it to climb up there to sew the blankets?" And I go, "I don't. I'm sitting down while I'm doing it." But it takes a while. The structure underneath, there's a hole about every 1/4 of an inch, and I use a 2-inch curve needle when I'm sewing with the wire. And it takes 2 of us, again, roughly 8 hours to sew 1 engine blanket on, and they're good for roughly 3 flights. Next. Another favorite. Only his name's the multi-needle sewing machine. It's not very original, but that's what he is. We only have 2 of these sewing machines in the United States. One's in California, where the shuttles were originally built, and then the second one we have, obviously, is at Kennedy. The blankets, the tiles, and everything were initially built in California with the shuttles. As the shuttles were arriving to Kennedy, it seemed kind of foolish, but that's what they were doing. As we were needing new blankets for the shuttles, we would take the measurements at Kennedy, send the measurements for the tiles or the blankets to California. They would be built over there and then sent back to us. Quite a long turnaround time. So starting in '87, we closed production in California, and that's why my building was born, as we started building all the tile and all the blankets here at Kennedy back in '87. This machine here has 30 needles. This is the machine that we use to quilt the fib or the fibrous insulated blankets, those blankets that you see outside the shuttle. This is the machine that we build them with. There's 3 gallons of WD-40 that we put in there to help lubricate the fabric and the needles. And anybody who sews, you go, "Oh no, we're putting oil on fabric, it doesn't mix." And I'm also spraying it as it's going through. It takes roughly 3.5 minutes for the machine to quilt one side. We flip the plate around, and then we can finish the blanket. Next. And what comes out is a production unit. It's a 30 by 30 inch piece of fabric. And again, there is where thin as a placemat to 2 inches thick. And this weight savings, I mean, anybody can pick up a blanket and say, "Wow, this blanket's so heavy compared to a tile that's so light." But the wonderment of this fabric here, which is a quartz fabric, quartz thread, spun quartz batting, and the backing fabric is just plain old fiberglass, is in this surface area right here. I could fit anywhere between 15 and 25 tile, depending on the size. So that's that many tile, or at least that we didn't have to make anymore, plus bonding them and everything else. And anybody who sees the shuttle, I always refer to her as, she looks like a woman's curvy body, because she really is curvy. It was really tight for us in the OMS pod, those 2 humps between the tail. We used to do a dice cut, cutting a tile in 9 different squares, almost to the very bottom of the tile, to get the curvature that we needed for those really tightly curved OMS pods. Once we converted to blankets, it was so easy. Really flexible, really flexible. Next. This is the process. It was always height of the blanket plus 1.5 inches. I would have to hand knot all the way around the blanket underneath where the threads intersected, flip the fabric to the back, and hand sew all the way around. We do that 2,200 times because we have 2,200 blankets on the shuttle. Now, what's amazing to people is that they ask me, "Oh, do you change the tile out all the time, change the blankets out all the time?" Absolutely not. If we did that, we would never fly. One thing I love about the blankets is, and I love it because we actually have patches all over. If you look at the shuttles, there's patches all over them. If they get a tear, we just patch them up like you're sewing your jeans and put a new stitch on it. But the difference is between this is, there's a patch there. I had to take a picture. You can see a patch right there. Next, please. This is a picture I took, and it's kind of self-serving because I made that blanket right there for her. That blanket there is only 1/2 inch thick, and I'm putting 5 penetration holes in it, which weakens the blanket considerably, and I'm beveling down to nothing. For those of you who are into stargazing, so are the astronauts, this is our stargazer system, star tracker system on the shuttle. They'll move these plates aside, and they will look just like the ancient mariners do, and they can tell where they are in space by looking through stars. This blanket's a real tough one, because I'm literally going from 1/2 inch down to nothing when I'm building that blanket. Anyway, you can see. Now, you're probably wondering why these blankets have holes in them and these don't. When we have access areas that we need to get to, before we used to scrape the blanket off, do whatever repair work that we needed to do, and then put a new blanket on. Well, we realized if we put these blankets here on a plate, and glue a blanket on, we can lift that whole section out and just bolt them back on. Saves us a lot of time and money. But each of those penetration holes are done by hand. We have a copper tool that we core through the blanket, stick a tube sleeving, stick it down in the center, roll the outside edges, and do 3 rows of hand stitching through the blanket. And then after they're done, and they're fit, and we know they're gonna fit perfectly, they come back to our building, and we will bake the blankets at 650 degrees for 4 hours, 850 degrees for 2 more hours. And I was showing some of you nice folks who came by the booth, you can see what the blanket looks like before it goes into heat cleaning and afterwards, night and day. It's very shiny, it almost looks like silk. And the reason why we do that is after we glue the blanket on with room temperature vulcanization, it's a red 2-part epoxy, we use that to glue our tile on and the blankets, is after we glue them on, we put a clear coat of ceramic paint called C9, and then 8 hours later we'll get a harder coat of white. And so it makes them sound like little teacups, but we have to have the fabric absolutely clean so all that ceramic can absorb into it. It's funny because when people come visit Atlantis, they'll say to me, I'm so disappointed, you guys don't even have a real space shuttle out on display. I go, what makes you think that? And they'll say, well, she looks too clean. She looks pretty good for reentry, she's pretty clean. But when they look at the different variances of the white from the glaze, they say it looks like paper mache. But when they say that, I know exactly what they mean. Next. So this is the OMS pod. These are our thicker blankets. These are our class 11s. They're 2 inches thick, and a lot of people will incorrectly say, oh, they're so thick because they're next to the engines. Not true. When I mentioned that the second area that was hottest on the shuttle is right in her wing glove right there, we have exact heat that comes from that area and goes right to the front of the OMS pods. The tiles there used to be all white until we found out after a few shuttle flights that excessive heat coming from that part of the wing was going right over the top of the OMS pod, softening the tiles to a very, very, not a very safe way. It was not very safe. So now we've changed the tile, that area, to black, and we call those our shuttle eyeballs. So if anybody's seen the shuttle, you see the front tiles are black. But another reason why I have this picture up here is if you see these darker blankets here, we can date our blankets and our tile pretty accurately. The darker the blanket, the older the blanket, the lighter the tile, the older the tile. These blankets here have been on her since Atlantis' first flight of October 3rd of 1985, and we can tell that by the color. The cost savings that we had by switching to the blankets was not only a weight savings of almost 8,000 pounds. When Shuttle first flew, it was $10,000 a pound to send something into space, but someone has told me that's been amended with all the SpaceX flights, that now it's down to $7,500 a pound. I'm not sure how accurate that is. It's just not, it's not cheap to send something into space. But we saved so much weight. 85% of Atlantis' blankets and about 87% of her tiles are the originals for when she flew, which surprises everybody because they think, oh, all the horror tile stories that we heard. Initially in development, but my building came up with a tile repair kit. We've learned a lot of things since the first shuttles, and you'd be amazed at how tough our tiles are. I mean, they can break somewhat, but we have really good techniques on how to repair them. Next. Ah, yes. I cover this in my book. This is on STS 117, and again, talking about the OMS pod and how thick the blankets are. During launch, one of the blankets at the very top of the OMS pod peeled away, and they were really scared about how well it would be to come home. And again, it's a pretty high wind area there. So they did a spacewalk. John Olivas went out there on EVA 3 to go out there. But they were afraid that there would be excessive heat dragging, and we don't want excessive drag. A lot of things can happen. So you see in the upper right-hand corner, that's John using a needle and thread, our little hero. But we laughed when we first saw him do the spacewalk, because at first when he came out, he brought a suture kit with a little teeny needle and a little thing of thread, and we're all laughing thinking, does he know he's working on a 2-inch blanket? But what was so cool about this is to realize the importance of how we care for an astronaut's safety. We figured it would probably be all right to come back. That's not a real critical area. In that area, the blankets are made for 1,200 degrees. We will only see maybe 800 in that area, which I know for us that seems hot, but trust me, in the thermal world, 800 degrees really is nothing. So anyway, he ended up eventually using his fingers and pushing it down. But overnight, when they saw that picture, NASA came to our building and said, look at us, we know what happened with Columbia. We need to make sure we get this one home. So they had us replicate that whole section of the OMS pod by building 4 tile and 2 blankets, 4 samples exactly like that area, and we had 24 hours to do that, send those 4 samples to Houston for them to do heat testing, arc jet testing, wind tunnel testing, everything they could to make sure if John could not get the blanket back down, would she make it home, the shuttle make it home okay? But it did, and he fixed it. So next. But this is a cool shot. When I talk about the shuttle eyeball, you see how the black tile, those used to be white. This was the blanket there. And it sounds like I'm bragging on myself, but when the pictures first came out, first thing people said is, who made that blanket? And we said, yeah, but we don't know who made the blanket, it's who installed it. Whoever put the blanket on did not put enough RTV. But I was looking at the NASA photos, and this blanket right there, I was the one that made that one. Thank God it wasn't mine. Anyway, but this is John, and you see he's being scooted over so that he can start doing the repair. Next. Oh, I love talking about these. Again, something as little as these 2 items. This is called a pillow gap filler. These are all done by hand. In the initial testing of Shuttle, we had a lot of heat going, of course, going through. These gap fillers are between the tile to prevent any heat coming down, but we had a lot of airflow that, believe it or not, when we glue the shuttle tile on, they're only glued onto a little piece of felt called a SIP pad or a stress isolation pad. We can't hard bond a tile onto a shuttle because you have to allow for expansion and contraction, and if we left it hard on, the tile would crack. So they're literally floating, ever so slightly, but still. What we found initially, before we started putting gap fillers, they were actually rotating a little bit when she was coming home, and that's uncomfortable. So this part that you see here, that would be the white part that you would see sticking out between the tile. And as a seamstress, I love pointing this out. Gap filler, you'll notice every inch, I know it's not a very good picture, but every inch I had to do a French knot all the way down the side. Special reason for that, and that's what quality was looking for. If by chance some wind would catch that area there and start peeling the sleeving back, every inch it would give it an extra chance to stop. It would blow to an inch, stop, and if it went further, we had a knot that would prevent it from peeling away. So a small little detail like that, even the amount of grams of batting, depending on what tile it was going through, is how many grams of batting I would put inside that gap filler. Pillow gap filler, Ames gap filler. This one probably means nothing to anybody, but I had the chance to meet Steve Robinson on STS-114 when he came to Kennedy. These gap fillers are very interesting. We have to do these by hand. The Ames gap filler is just ceramic fabric with ceramic paint on it. They're as thin as a notebook piece of paper, and we go up to 6 layers of that. If we go beyond 6, then we convert that to a pillow one. But this is an actual picture when Steve Robinson had to go for the first time underneath the space shuttle because we had 2 gap fillers that came loose. And again, we're worried about the heat and drag, especially on the belly. So he had to do a spacewalk for the first time, and he was bringing out like little pliers and everything else. And really all he had to do was he just took his gloves and went with the tube. But they were near the nose landing gear door. But anyway, I was able to get this picture because, again, where they install this stuff is right across the street. So when they came back, one of our guys, Terry White, who's our manager over at Bay 2, said, hey, you want to see that gap filler that Steve pulled out? And I said, sure. So that's a picture of the exact gap filler that he pulled out. It's now on display at the Smithsonian. Next. So this just shows an example of my tile text. And like I said, the tiles go in between. So many of them. They go up to 2,300 degrees. The initial shuttles, both Columbia and Challenger, had over 32,000 tile. Oh, I hope that's not for me. Anyway, but after we switched to blankets, we got that down to roughly about 25,000, which is still a lot. Next. Oh, this is me standing underneath the beanie cap. This is on display. When I said I worked high and I worked low, the beanie cap is here. And would you believe me if Jean, who's so afraid of heights, was actually tasked to go up there and work? I'm so high up there. I used to say a prayer because there's cameras everywhere. We also have a system up there. A lot of birds are attracted to that orange tank, and we've had to roll back a few shuttles for birds pecking holes into it. So we have people up there with air guns and air horns to keep all them, so they're up there with me. We have a pleated, and I've got a close-up on the next one, but I have a pleated area there that I'll talk about. We made the slide wire baskets. There's the beanie cap, and you see how high up I'm in there. Oof. Next, I have a close-up. This is on display at the Atlantis exhibit. I literally had to come up here and hand sew patches on here. It's called the GOX hose. It's a gaseous oxygen hose, and it's venting at the top of the beanie cap. Well, like fabric, if it's exposed to the elements, it's going to break down. So they always say, you know, most of the people didn't want to go, and I go, hey, I'll go up there. It's very scary up there because you're up over 210 feet, higher than that probably, but it's so beautiful up there. The water's so blue, and it's so pretty. We didn't have to do it often, but we did. But again, that's where I would have to go. Next. This is the KU band antenna cover. This was a tricky one to do. You can see it here. The antenna is only open after we open up the payload bay doors, then the antenna comes out. The shuttle is flying upside down. Everybody thinks she's up like she is, but she's not. Shuttle is actually flying upside down with the payload bay doors facing Earth because we're sending communications back, so we need everything open. This cover is another 4-day part. The film is so thin, I would have to lay the film out on my table, cut it out with an X-Acto blade, use an awl to pre-punch my sewing holes, take my little alligator clips and tape the teeth, overlap my seam and hand sew it by hand, and that would take probably 4 days to do. Very delicate film. The guys would come upstairs and watch us build our parts and want to pick them up, and we would always say, do not touch that one, because if I even got 1/8 of an inch of a tear in that one, even just from holding it, it would have to be scrapped. Next. That's me. We built the Orion test parachutes for the Artemis program a number of years ago. That's a different experience there. Our tables were 150 feet long, and if we were measuring out for a parachute, if it was a 10-pound ribbon, I'd have to hang a 10-pound weight off a 150-foot table and mark it, because you can't mark them straight. It has to be under a pull tension. So that's me sewing. It takes a long, we had machines with 4 bobbins to sew 2 rows on each side. That was cool. And we also helped repair the shuttle chutes when they came in. It's kind of funny that parachute's 40 feet across, and about 20 seconds before landing, right back here, right there at the door, we built all that blanket by hand too. We used pyrotechs or explosives to blow that door off so the parachute could come out. So we had to build that blanket every single flight because it blows off and it literally cascades down the runway. But I bring that up is because the guys literally, we have a grooved landing strip. The guys are dragging the parachute along the ground, and we're screaming at NASA TV, don't do that, because we have to fix it. You guys aren't the ones that have to fix it, because we reuse those chutes all the time. Next. And this is nice. If you get a chance to go to Titusville, Florida, we have this monument here, and a lot of our shuttle workers, my name is right there on that, so that's nice. So what's nice is when I'm dead and gone, my kids can come up there and see the tribute to me. And it's a beautiful exhibit. They have at the park, they represent Apollo and all the programs that we had in NASA. So next. Next. So right now, besides being a docent, my partner Ken and I, and he's speaking afterward, he found out Friday we had a last-minute cancellation for speakers, so Ken's been cobbling up the last presentation today. That's Ken and I down there. That's at the Artemis launch. The day she rolled out to the pad, it was almost 100 degrees in Florida, and as photographers, you wait as she rolls out to the pad, and it was 8 hours in the sun that day for her to roll out. Long day, hot day, but it's a very historical day. Next. And that's him and I again in front. And that's Bill Nelson, our NASA administrator there. Bill comes down a lot. He's He's the most energetic man. I'm not sure how old he is. He's got to be at least 80-something. But he's always there whenever we have a big launch. Bill's always there. Next. That's the vehicle assembly building, the tallest one-story building in the world, and you see Artemis coming out. It's such an impressive rocket. We've used actually, we've used a few shuttle parts. The engines we've used, the RS-25s that we've used on shuttle, we recycled into the new rocket. Anything we can do to save money. Next. And there's close-ups of it. Such a pretty rocket. It really is. It's impressive. Next. Oh, I have to tell you a story about this. Anyway, we have the description for it, and I know it's got a lot of details, but I got to point this out. See, I don't know, maybe it's just I'm just a romantic. The night that Artemis launched, it was 1:30 in the morning, and Ken and I always look. We have this piling. The press site is right in the foreground, so when we go do the launches, we're at the press site. Lots of history there. But anyway, it's just a thing that Ken and I talk about. We always look at it as a good luck omen if there's a bird there on that pylon. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. Well, that night, I was up on the CBS building. That rocket, when it launched for the first time, was so bright, and even though we know how to adjust our cameras for pictures, the flame was so bright, it bleached everything out. And I was on the CBS building, and it was vibrating, and I was with Peter King. Some of you older people may know, he's a radio reporter for CBS. He had his arm around me, and the building literally is shaking. It's an old building. He said, Jean, isn't this beautiful? But if it keeps going like this, you and I are going to find ourselves on the first floor. It was really vibrating. But the only thing I cared about, as silly as this is, Ken was right by the countdown clock. And I said to him, and I'm going to start crying, I said to him, it's such a historical night tonight. And I said, I know it sounds stupid. But I said, was there a bird on the pylon? Because where I was at, I couldn't see. So Ken said, I looked at my pictures, and that's a heron, but he also took a video, and it's so funny, because the second the rocket launched, the heron opened up his beak, and I said to Ken, see it saying, oh, isn't this so cool? So that's just me, that's just me. Next. So this is the trajectory. We have Artemis 2 that's coming back. We've already got the crew, so that's just a quick description. Oh, I'm running out of time. Anyway, next one, please. Oh, anyway. And that talks about all that. You guys will talk about that. I know I need to hurry up. Next, please. Oh, there's the Artemis crew. Ken and I have been so fortunate as press. We get to meet everybody, astronauts, all of them. They're all very nice people. And it's going to be next year that we're going to go loop around the moon for the first time. A woman, it makes me happy. We're going to have a woman for the first time who'll be going around the moon. Next. Oh, and see, you guys, we'll see it. You guys won't, but we will. Boeing is going to be launched their Starliner, hopefully, on May 6th. And the reason why I insisted on putting this in my program is, you notice how it's got quilted fabric just like the shuttle. And when I speak to the thermal techs over at Boeing, I said, hey, you have a light blue glaze. Can you tell me what it is? I said, it looks a lot like shuttle. We're not different color, though. And it's the usual thing that you get. They'll say, oh, it's very similar to what you guys used on shuttle, but it's proprietary and we can't tell you what it is. Next. So that Ken and I were in Indiana. We drove all the way from Florida. My twin sister met me up there. That's my sister Joan, and that's me. We met each other there in Indiana to see the eclipse. That morning it was rainy and foggy, and I literally said a prayer to God. We've drove so far. Please let it clear, and it did. Next. I have an obsidian stone that I got in Mexico, and that's what you see. I have the sun looking through that the day before because we're testing to see how things are going to be. Next. And again, I have a book. It's a children's book. Next. And I'm almost out, but I make shirts. Everything that I sew has a piece of flown payload bay fabric on it. Most of my fabric's STS-93, which is a very historical flight because Eileen Collins was our first American commander of a space shuttle, and so I bought a pay liner from her. So anything that you buy, if you get a chance, and I'm almost out of everything, you can stop and buy and find out if you want anything, but all my stuff is almost gone. Anyway, next. So here I am. This is my last one, and I only have a few minutes for questions, but to give you a concept of how tall the shuttle stack is, it's 185 feet tall. And there's me standing underneath the stack when Endeavour was on the pad. I literally had to blow it up because in the picture I look like I'm this high. So there I am right there. And so I want to thank you all for listening, and I hope you've learned something. But believe it or not, it's really not all about me. I just want the word to get out that anytime we send something into space, be it a satellite, you name it, a rocket, we always need seamstresses. And I'm trying to encourage kids, math and science is important, but if you're a creative mind, NASA's looking for you too. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.